The resilient specimens. Senior xenobiologist Zextal stood before the observation chamber. All 6 of her eyes widened in disbelief. The human specimen should have been dead. By all logical standards of biology, it should have expired hours ago. Yet there it was, not just alive, but actually becoming stronger. "Play back the incident report," she commanded, her voice trembling slightly. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the events from 12 hours earlier. The human designated subject 7249 had been part of a routine stress test when the atmospheric regulator malfunctioned. The chamber had reached temperatures of 42 degrees Celsius with humidity levels of 95%. For most sentient species, this would have been fatal within minutes. But the human, it had simply sweated. "Remarkable," Zextal muttered, making notes on her datapad. "They have an integrated cooling system that activates automatically. And it's efficient." The human had not only survived, but had continued performing the assigned physical tasks. Its core temperature had remained stable through a process that seemed, to Zextal's scientific mind, almost magical. Water secretion through the skin, evaporative cooling. It was brilliantly simple yet incredibly effective. "Director, you need to see this," her assistant, Krell, called from the medical bay. Zextal reluctantly turned away from the observation window and made her way to the adjacent room. Krell was examining the results from subject 7249's latest tissue sample. "Look at the cellular regeneration rate," he said, gesturing to the magnified display. Zextal's antennae twitched in surprise. The human cells were repairing themselves at an astonishing rate. The minor abrasions and muscle damage from the physical tests were already healing. "How is this possible?" she wondered aloud. "Their genetic structure isn't particularly remarkable. They don't have redundant organs like the Vrex. They lack the biochemical resilience of the Morta. Yet they endure," Krell finished. "Director, I've been analyzing their nutrition requirements. You won't believe what I found." He pulled up another holographic display, this one showing the chemical composition of the human's last meal. Zextal's eyes narrowed as she read through the list. "This can't be right," she said. "These levels of capsaicin would be toxic to most species. And what is this? Ethanol." "They call it beer," Krell explained. "It's a mild neurotoxin that they consume for pleasure." Zextal found herself sitting down heavily in her hover chair. Everything she thought she knew about biological limits was being challenged by these beings. They seemed to operate on a completely different set of rules. Subject 7249 had been captured during a routine exploration mission. The human vessel had been disabled, the atmosphere vented into space. The recovery team had expected to find corpses. Instead, they found survivors. The humans had sealed off sections of their ship using emergency barriers and survived for nearly 30 standard hours in minimal atmosphere and freezing temperatures. "Update the mission logs," Zextal ordered. "Classification of humans to be changed from standard biological entity to extreme survival specialist." And Krell, "Yes, Director. We need more specimens. Voluntary ones, this time. If we're to understand these creatures, we need their cooperation." She paused, looking back at the observation chamber where subject 7249 was now doing what the humans called push-ups. "Something tells me we've only scratched the surface of what they're capable of." As if to emphasize her point, an alarm blared from one of the monitoring stations. Subject 7249 had just broken another strength record, despite the previous day's ordeal. Zextal's scientific excitement was tinged with a hint of fear. What kind of world had produced beings like this? And more importantly, what were they truly capable of when pushed to their limits? She had a feeling she was going to find out, whether she wanted to or not. Chemical warfare. "I must respectfully decline to participate in this experiment," Director Zextal. Chief Medical Officer Vrenka's tendrils writhed in agitation as he stared at the human beverage sample on the laboratory table. The dark liquid emitted an aroma that made his sensory glands ache. "Noted, Doctor," Zextal replied, her own antennae twitching with barely contained excitement. But surely you must be curious about how they process these compounds. The human volunteer, who had introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Chen, sat calmly at the testing station, sipping what he called coffee while surrounded by increasingly agitated alien scientists. "It's perfectly safe," Dr. Chen assured them, taking another deliberate sip. "Though I admit, this isn't even the strong stuff." Krell, monitoring the human's vital signs, chittered in disbelief. The caffeine content alone should be causing severe neurological disruption. Yet his brainwave patterns show increased alertness and cognitive function. Dr. Chen shrugged, a uniquely human gesture that the alien scientists had come to recognize as indicating casual dismissal. "Wait until I tell you about energy drinks." Zextal made a note on her datapad. In the week since they'd begun accepting voluntary human participants for their studies, each revelation seemed more incredible than the last. Their ability to not just survive, but thrive on substances that would be toxic to most other species was unprecedented. "Now," Dr. Chen said, reaching into his approved personal effects bag, "who wants to learn about spicy food?" Several of the junior researchers immediately backed away from the testing station. The human produced a small red pod that their scanners identified as a ghost pepper. The chemical analysis made Vrenka's epidermis pale to a sickly green. "This is capsaicin," Dr. Chen explained, holding up the pepper. "It's a compound that triggers pain receptors. We eat it because we enjoy the sensation. You deliberately cause yourself pain for enjoyment?" one of the junior researchers asked, their voice modulator crackling with confusion. "Exactly." Dr. Chen's enthusiasm was both infectious and terrifying. "It triggers the release of endorphins, natural painkillers. Some humans even become addicted to the sensation." Zextal watched in horrified fascination as the human bit into the pepper. Their monitoring equipment went haywire, registering pain responses that should have sent the subject into shock. Instead, Dr. Chen's face merely reddened, and he began to sweat. "Remarkable," Krall muttered, adjusting his sensors. "The human's body is treating this as a minor inconvenience rather than the chemical attack it actually is." But they hadn't even gotten to the most baffling part of human chemical resistance. That came later in the day when Dr. Chen introduced them to the concept of happy hour. "Ethanol," Zextal read from her display, "is a poison that humans intentionally ingest for recreational purposes." "We call it alcohol," Dr. Chen corrected, holding up a glass of amber liquid. "And yes, in moderation, it can be quite enjoyable. It reduces inhibitions, can facilitate social bonding, and some studies suggest certain forms might even have health benefits." The entire research team watched in stunned silence as the human consumed the neurotoxin, then smiled and asked for another. "Director," Vrenka whispered, his medical training finally overwhelming his shock, "we need to discuss the philosophical implications of this. A species that casually consumes poisons for pleasure. What does that suggest about their homeworld? About their evolution?" Zextal nodded slowly, her scientific mind racing with possibilities. "Their entire biology seems to be built around adaptation and survival. They don't just endure toxic substances. They found ways to enjoy them, to use them to their advantage." As if to punctuate her point, Dr. Chen was now explaining how humans used various toxic compounds in their medicine, a practice they called chemotherapy, to combat cellular mutations. "They poison themselves to survive," Krall observed, his voice filled with a mix of horror and admiration. "No," Zextal corrected, a realization dawning. "They've weaponized their own adaptability. Everything that should kill them, they've turned into a tool, a pleasure, or a cure." She turned to her team, all six eyes gleaming with the excitement of scientific discovery. "We're not just dealing with resilient organisms, we're dealing with biological alchemists." As the day's testing concluded, Dr. Chen casually mentioned something about looking forward to showing them how humans handle radiation exposure. Vrenka fainted. Zextal just made another note on her datapad. Something told her they were going to need a lot more research funding, and possibly some stronger restraints on their observation chambers, just in case. Sleep it is for the weak. They're doing it again, Krell announced, his voice tinged with equal parts fascination and horror. Director Zextal moved to the observation window, where their team of human volunteers was engaged in what they called a movie marathon. It was hour 37. How are they still conscious? Junior researcher Limxa asked, adjusting her sensors for the 12th time, convinced they must be malfunctioning. According to everything we know about neurological functions, they should have entered forced hibernation by now. Dr. Chen, their primary human consultant, looked up from his tablet where he was reviewing their data. Oh, this is nothing. Wait until I tell you about college students during finals week. The alien research team had been stymied by human sleep patterns from the start. Every other sentient species they'd encountered had regular, predictable sleep cycles. Some required hibernation periods, others had multiple short rest cycles throughout their day. But humans treated sleep like it was a suggestion rather than a biological necessity. Play back the stress test logs, Zextal ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, showing footage from 3 days ago. They had been running endurance tests, pushing the limits of human wakefulness. The results had been unsettling. As you can see, Zextal narrated for the team of new researchers who had joined the project. Humans can remain functional for extended periods without sleep. Their performance degrades, yes, but not nearly as quickly as our models predicted. The footage showed humans completing complex tasks even after 48 hours without rest. They were slower, irritable, and as Dr. Chen had explained, running on coffee and spite. But they were still functioning. But here's where it gets interesting, Krell added, fast-forwarding the footage. Watch what happens when we introduce a perceived crisis. In the recording, the research team had simulated an emergency, a fire in an adjacent lab. The sleep-deprived humans had snapped to alertness instantly, executing a perfect emergency response protocol. Adrenaline, Dr. Chen explained, noting the aliens' confusion. In crisis situations, our bodies can temporarily override our need for sleep. It's a survival mechanism. Everything about you is a survival mechanism, Limxa muttered, not unkindly. The most baffling aspect of human sleep, however, wasn't their ability to go without it. It was how they chose to get it. You're telling me, Vrenka said slowly, reviewing the data from their sleep study, that humans can fall asleep almost anywhere, in any position. Dr. Chen nodded, gesturing to the collection of images they'd gathered. Humans sleeping upright on public transportation. Humans napping at their desks. One particularly impressive image showed a human sleeping while standing up, leaning against a wall. We call it catching some Z's, he explained. When we need sleep badly enough, we can get it almost anywhere. But your bodies aren't designed for rest in these positions, Vrenka protested. The physical strain alone should prevent sleep. Dr. Chen just shrugged. Tell that to my grad school self who could fall asleep halfway through writing a sentence. The research team had also discovered that humans could alter their sleep patterns dramatically based on circumstance. Their test subjects had demonstrated the ability to switch from nocturnal to diurnal schedules with minimal adjustment time. It's like their entire species evolved to say sleep when you can, where you can, Zextal observed, but also don't sleep if something more important is happening. As if to prove her point, one of their human volunteers had fallen asleep mid-conversation, slumped over in a chair. 5 minutes later, when another volunteer opened a bag of something called chips, the sleeping human awoke instantly, alert and asking for a share. The pattern is clear, Zextal announced to her team later that day, presenting her findings. Human sleep is not just a biological function. It's a tactical choice. They've evolved to be able to defer it, minimize it, or grab it opportunistically. But why? One of the junior researchers asked. What kind of evolutionary pressure creates a species that treats essential biological functions as optional? Dr. Chen, who had been quiet during the presentation, spoke up. Have you ever seen Earth's wildlife documentaries? When every predator is faster than you, every prey more agile, when your only advantage is that big brain of yours, well, you learn to stay awake long enough to outsmart them all. A thoughtful silence fell over the research team. Once again, they found themselves wondering about the crucible that had forged humanity. What kind of planet produced beings that viewed sleep as a luxury rather than a necessity? As the day shift ended and the night shift began, a concept the humans found amusing since space had no day or night, Zextol made her final notes. Subjects continue to display highly irregular sleep patterns. Recommendation: classify human sleep behavior as tactically adaptive rather than biologically regulated. Additional note: requisition more of the beverage coffee for the research team. We're going to need it. In the observation room, the movie marathon continued. One human was sleeping upright, another was wide awake despite not having slept for 2 days, and a third was explaining the concept of power naps to an increasingly distressed Frenka. Just another day in xenobiology. Built different. This can't be right, junior researcher Lim Xa muttered, running the numbers for the 4th time. Director Zextol, you need to see this. The senior xenobiologist glided over to Lim Xa's station, where holographic displays showed the latest endurance test results. All 6 of her eyes widened as she processed the data. They're still going, she asked, incredulity tinging her usually composed voice. On the observation deck below, 5 human volunteers were engaged in what they called a marathon. They had been running for over 3 standard hours, their bodies covered in sweat, but showing no signs of stopping. Dr. Chen, who had elected to remain on the research team's side of the glass this time, nodded proudly. The current Earth record for continuous running is over 350 of your standard hours. Vrenka, who had just entered the lab, promptly dropped his datapad. Impossible, the chief medical officer stammered. The metabolic demands alone. Oh, that's not even the interesting part. Dr. Chen interrupted, his eyes gleaming with the particular excitement humans displayed when about to shatter alien preconceptions. Let me tell you about persistence hunting. Over the next hour, as the human runners continued their seemingly endless circuit, Dr. Chen explained how early humans had hunted prey not through superior speed or strength, but through sheer endurance. They would pursue animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. Your thermal regulation is the key, isn't it? Zextol mused, watching the sweat evaporate from the runner's skin. You can cool yourselves continuously, while most animals must stop to pant or risk overheating. Exactly, Dr. Chen confirmed. We're not the fastest or the strongest, but we can outlast almost anything. Krull, who had been quietly analyzing tissue samples, suddenly spoke up. Director, you need to see these cellular repair rates. Their muscles are adapting to the stress in real time. The data showed that the humans' bodies were not just enduring the prolonged exercise. They were adapting to it. Muscle fibers were becoming more efficient. Oxygen uptake was optimizing. Even their bones were subtly remodeling to handle the stress better. They don't just survive, Zextol realized. They get stronger from adversity. As if to prove her point, one of the runners below increased their pace, calling out something about a second wind. But endurance was just the beginning. Throughout the day, the research team discovered more bizarre aspects of human physical capabilities. They could hold their breath for extended periods and train to extend this time. Their bones could heal from breaks, often becoming stronger at the point of fracture. They could survive extreme temperature ranges that would kill most species. Their bodies could adapt to high altitudes by producing more red blood cells. It's like their entire biology is designed to say whatever doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Lim Xa observed, watching as the runners finally concluded their marathon, immediately asking about something called protein shakes. Dr. Chen's explanation of human exercise culture left the research team in stunned silence. The concept that humans would voluntarily subject themselves to physical stress would actually seek out discomfort and exertion, seemed to defy logical behavior. "Let me get this straight," Vrenka said slowly. "You deliberately damage your muscles, so they'll grow back stronger." "Pretty much," Dr. Chen confirmed. "We even have a saying, no pain, no gain." The implications were staggering. Most species evolved to avoid stress and conserve energy. Humans had evolved to pursue stress, to adapt to it, to thrive on it. Later that day, as Zextal prepared her report for the Galactic Science Council, she struggled to find the right words to convey what they'd discovered. In conclusion, she finally wrote, "Human biology appears to operate on a fundamentally different paradigm than any previously encountered species. They do not simply survive their environment, they actively challenge it. Their bodies are not merely adapted to their world, they are designed to adapt continuously, treating every stress as an opportunity for improvement." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "It is the assessment of this research team that humanity's greatest biological advantage is not any specific physical trait, but rather their universal capacity for adaptation. They are, in essence, living proof that what doesn't kill you really does make you stronger." As she finished her report, a commotion from the lab drew her attention. The marathon runners, having barely rested, were now asking about something called weightlifting. Vrenka was already reaching for his medical kit. Zextal just added a postscript to her report. "Request immediate funding increase. These humans are going to break all our equipment, and possibly our understanding of biology itself." In the lab below, as if to emphasize her point, one of the humans was explaining the concept of ultramarathons to an increasingly pale-looking junior researcher. Sometimes, Zextal reflected, the most terrifying thing about humans wasn't just what they could do. It was what they would choose to do, simply to prove that they could. Evolution's experiments. The Galactic Science Council chamber was silent as Director Zextal concluded her presentation. The holographic displays showing her team's findings slowly faded, leaving the assembled scientists in thoughtful silence. It was first speaker Nastul who finally broke the quiet. "Director, are you seriously proposing that this planet Earth is responsible for producing such biological anomalies?" Zextal's antennae twitched with barely contained excitement. "Not anomalies. First speaker. Adaptations. And yes, that's exactly what I'm proposing." She gestured, and a new hologram sprang to life. A detailed model of Earth. As the assembled council watched, the planet's history played out in accelerated time. Continents shifting, climates changing, mass extinctions coming and going. Earth isn't just a planet, Zextal explained. It's an evolutionary crucible. Every challenge you can imagine, Earth has thrown at its inhabitants. Rapid temperature changes. Check. Atmospheric composition shifts. Multiple times. Extreme predation pressure. Constant. Dr. Chen, who had been invited to attend as a scientific advisor, stepped forward. "We have a saying on Earth, life finds a way. But for humans, it might be more accurate to say life finds a way, then figures out how to exploit it." Krull, who had been monitoring the Council's biological responses, noted with interest that several members showed stress indicators at this statement. Zextal continued, "Our research has shown that humans aren't just survivors, they're the ultimate adaptable species. They don't just endure their environment, they reshape themselves to master it." She began listing off their findings. Resistance to toxins that would kill most species. Ability to extract benefits from substances that should be poisonous. Highly irregular but tactically advantageous sleep patterns. Unprecedented physical endurance and adaptability. Rapid healing and ability to grow stronger from damage. But the most remarkable thing, Zextal emphasized, isn't any single adaptation. It's their metacognition about their own adaptability. The hologram changed to show footage from their research facility. Humans were deliberately exposing themselves to stress, discomfort, and challenges, and visibly enjoying it. They understand their own adaptability and actively seek out ways to trigger it. Dr. Chen explained. We call it training, or practice, or pushing our limits. We do it for fun. A nervous titter ran through the council chamber. Fun. Second speaker Vrulkath asked, their vocal sacs pulsing with concern. You deliberately stress your biology for entertainment. Among other reasons, Dr. Chen confirmed. Sometimes we do it to prepare for even bigger challenges. Zextal took over again. This is why we've had to fundamentally revise our understanding of biological limits. Humans don't just ignore them. They actively search for them, then figure out how to move past them. She brought up one final hologram, a compilation of human achievements. Running ultramarathons in extreme heat, climbing the highest mountains without oxygen, swimming in freezing waters, surviving in space. Earth didn't just create humans, Zextal concluded. It created a species that treats every limitation as a challenge, every obstacle as an opportunity to adapt. They are living proof that with enough time and pressure, evolution doesn't just produce survivors, it produces conquerors. As the council chamber erupted into discussion, Dr. Chen leaned over to Zextal. You know, he said quietly, you haven't even gotten to the really weird stuff yet. Zextal's head frills flattened in alarm. What do you mean? Well, Dr. Chen grinned, wait until I tell you about how some humans can digest milk into adulthood, or how we're one of the few mammals that don't synthesize our own vitamin C, or about our appendix, or... Zextal quickly signaled Kral to bring her a stimulant. She had a feeling this was going to be a long debriefing. As the council continued their heated debate about the implications of human biology, a junior researcher approached Zextal with a concerned expression. Director, they said hesitantly, the human subjects in our lab, they're asking about something called extreme sports. Should we be worried? Zextal sighed, all 6 eyes blinking in sequence. Probably. But at this point, I'm more worried about what would happen if we tried to stop them. In the background, Dr. Chen was explaining parkour to an increasingly distressed Frenka. Just another day in the ongoing discovery of what made humans human, whatever that meant. And somewhere, on countless worlds across the galaxy, biology textbooks were being frantically rewritten, all because a bunch of primates on a death world had decided that the best response to adversity was to get better at handling it. Evolution's experiments had created something unique in humans. The real question was, what would they become next? The galaxy waited, somewhat nervously, to find out.